All right. Hello, everybody. And thank you for joining me this evening for the webinar on pelvic control, the overlooked link to better running performance and injury reduction. Again, super excited to speak to you on this topic tonight. It's one of those that I think over the years is, even now, has been completely overlooked by a lot of people, but it can really have a tremendous impact on your running, and hope to show you that here today. So before we get started, do me a favor, silence any technology around you, cell phones, any other distractions. The details in this webinar can help you create the best results possible. So I want to make sure you pick up on those small things so you can really take action starting tomorrow morning to be the best runner you can be. Take a second and look at your screen. You should see a floating panel somewhere or some kind of options or menu. If you can, click there just to locate the Q&A function. So throughout the webinar, if you have any kind of questions, anything you want to ask me specifically about what we're going over, or just want to throw something in there for me to answer at the end of the Q&A, you can do that there. If you need me to slow down for whatever reason, because I obviously love this type of stuff and get excited as we go through, feel free to also let me know. At the very end of the raffle, I will be giving away 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program. You need to be present to enter your name into the raffle. I think the entire webinar today probably should take us about 45, 50 minutes or so. I've really tried to really condense this information so you can take action rather than going through so much background that's very tedious. So hopefully get through a little more quickly than our normal webinars. If by chance you cannot stay for the entire thing, I will be sending out the webinar replay and the winner of the raffle tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So make sure you're checking your email then to see if you're the lucky winner if you enter, and to also reflect back on this content to hopefully take action and improve your running. But if you don't see that by 11:05, do me a favor, check your spam folder because it sometimes ends up in there. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, since we have a good amount of new people on the webinar tonight, my name is Garrett McLaughlin. I'm a licensed athletic trainer and strength conditioning coach in West Bloomfield, Michigan. So I run what is called the Healthy Running Program. Healthy Running Program, again, really serves runners regardless of their goals, whether they're trying to get faster, move better, reduce the likelihood of injury, or recover from injury. We have a lot of different programs and services in place there to hopefully help runners see the most success moving forward, regardless of where you live as well. I think one key thing to understand here, whether you're local here to Southeast Michigan, somewhere throughout the country, just have a lot of runners, New Hampshire, Nashville, Illinois, Florida, doesn't matter where you are, technology makes it very easy these days to work with runners, even do some of the basic things like your running analysis, your evaluations, and your program design. So let's get started here. So if you are on this webinar today because you have a history of running related injuries, and doesn't matter where, somewhere lower extremity, feel tight consistently, but notice that stretching and foam rolling only provides some type of temporary or short-term relief. If you incorporate strength training, but are curious if it's actually making you a better runner, so you're doing something, but it's actually translating over to improve your running performance or reduce your likelihood of injury with running, or you just overall want to be faster, more efficient, and resilient as a runner, you're in the right place today. So as we cover more of this background information on pelvic control, surprising, it really touches in a lot of these different areas. And I hope that the light bulb turns on for you guys, because I see it as an area that a lot of people are missing. And it's really one that can affect the entire lower extremity, create a lot of issues in terms of running related injury, a lot of your common stuff as well, your IT band syndrome, piriformis syndrome, Achilles, plantar fasciitis. I mean, it could really create issues throughout the kinetic chain. So I hope to really show you that here today. So what I want you to walk away with is just to have a better understanding about pelvic control so you can run more efficiently, improve running economy, and reduce your likelihood of injury for years to come. This is not a quick fix thing, right? If you came here looking for something that you can just implement immediately and go on your way and it's going to provide you tons of benefit, you're probably in the wrong place. This is something you will have to work for to some degree for those people who we do find fit into this category. Because just like, everything else with the human body, I always tell people, again, patience and consistency. Those are the two most specific things that create long-term results. And then obviously being on a specific program that addresses your needs, okay? So just to give us a little background here about what we're actually talking about in the webinar today, we're going to cover what's called, again, I told you before, pelvic control, but specifically we're trying to prevent pelvic drop. So what pelvic drop is, it's what's called the loss of frontal plane stabilization. So if we think about the pelvis, right? And I do this a lot of times. A lot of people think I'm crazy, but this is kind of how I think about the pelvis here, right? We have the spine, sacrum running down the center. We have the pelvis on either side here. Pelvis can move in a lot of different directions. Pelvis can tip, right? Or drop side to side, which is what we're going to talk about. We can anteriorly tilt, posterior tilt. We have anterior and posterior, vice versa. We have upslip, downslip. There's a lot of different positions that the pelvis can move into. Some good and natural, others we want to stay away from. From a stabilization and alignment standpoint, if you can see in this picture here, when that opposite side pelvis drops, this is a loss of stability or alignment at the pelvis, right? So you can see this woman here through this graphic on the right side of the screen, doing a great job, right? Pelvis is fairly level straight across, good alignment of her spine, alignment of the leg down to the floor. This is a good, efficient position as she runs. But on the left side, so as this woman strikes the ground, gets into early mid stance, all the body weight is coming down onto that leg. Anywhere from 2 to 4 times your body weight is striking, and you have to absorb as you hit the ground as you run. And then what's happening here, just due to lack of stability at the pelvis and some of these surrounding muscles, that opposite side is dropping, right? So this is creating kind of a cascade of events down the lower extremity, because what we see here is opposite side pelvis drops. What can happen, not always, but knee tends to collapse inward, foot can go more into an overpronated position, right? So when we think about pelvic control, this matters not just for this entire core hip region. This matters for the entire function of the lower extremity, right? We want to and promote optimal stabilization from the foot, the hip, and the pelvis. These areas really control that lower limb, because what happens here is, you see, as you start to drop in that opposite side pelvis, we go into what's called hip adduction. That leg, that hip, and knee are more underneath the midline of the body, right? Which we know through some of the research is a injury risk factor. When does this matter, though, is the question, right? You'll see people, and I think what's important to realize is that we want the pelvis to drop to some degree, just like we want the foot to pronate, right? We've been victimizing some of these things for years, even though they're natural shock absorption mechanisms at the body. So as you strike the ground, we want the foot to roll into pronation. We want that opposite side pelvis to drop to a degree, because that's how we absorb force. But at the pelvis specifically, we want to limit this to less than 5 degrees. So as soon as that pelvis starts to drop more than 5 degrees, we know that's significant. That's something we should address with either, again, rehab, strength training program, running retraining program, what have you, right? So that's an important thing to realize is, and I think with the foot too, and I'm getting a little bit off topic here, we want pronation to happen. We want pelvic drop to happen, but we want to make sure we're staying out of the excessive ranges of motion, which are going to really limit stabilization and alignment of the lower body. Okay, so since we just went through a little bit of background information to get us started, the bare bones here, but want to kind of hear from you guys a little bit. So far, does improving pelvic control sound like an area that could positively impact your running? And then next question here, which most describes what you were after from viewing the webinar today? Is it less tightness somewhere in the lower extremity, reducing injury or recovering from injury, improving running form, a more effective strength training program, knowledge gains, or are you just here to win the raffle? Which is completely fine. I'm not mad at you for that. So some of you might hear me talking about this poll that's on the screen right now. Depending on how you're watching the webinar today, some people see these, some people don't. It's only a handful sometimes that don't see it, whether you're actually a Zoom, logged into Zoom, either the computer, iPad, phone. Some of you might be dialing in and actually listening today. But we have a good crew here. About 40 people watching. So we're going to get a couple more responses here. I just want to see and narrow it down to see what it is you guys are after today. So hopefully I can fine tune the information a little bit more to the group. About 91%. Not bad, not bad. All right, so let's just see what we're dealing with here so you guys can kind of see what I'm looking at. Luckily, you guys are in the right place. So sounds already like an area that can impact your running, which I think it can. Again, it's so overlooked for so many people. And I think once you understand this and see this, the light bulb will go on. You're like, okay, I can't wait to put that in action tomorrow with my strength training or to think about as I run. What are the key things people are after? Top priority here is improving running form. So what you're going to understand about this topic here is a lot of places you'll go to and they're going to talk about again, what your cadence should be, how you should lean, how your foot should strike the ground. We're not going to talk about running form in that sense. We're going to talk about something that's almost that underlying stabilization and alignment area that will improve your running form naturally, right? So we're almost going to work from the inside out here with this. And then we have a more effective strength training program, which is great. Just because this is one of those things that so many people I'm going to talk about on the next slide are really overlooking. And it's really a simple little tweak to your strength training program to improve the effectiveness. Some other things here, just overall knowledge gains, reducing injury, less tightness. Awesome. So let's get into the content here. I don't want to waste any more of your time. Now, kind of a goofy image here, but something I really wanted to start with. So over the years, my role has changed significantly. I started out first in the athletic training and still am athletic training, sports medicine field, working in Division I college athletics, high school athletics, worked again, a whole different sports, professional ultimate frisbee, cross country, track and field, soccer, tennis, football, a lot of different sports over the years. It wasn't until I actually took a step outside of that I left the traditional sports med field and started to move into the fitness industry. So what this did by working at athletic clubs, small fitness studios, sports performance facilities, I've been in a variety of settings throughout the years, is I was fortunate because I was able to see so many people move on a daily basis, right? When you're not just responding and reacting to injuries on an individual basis, but you're watching people move in group exercise classes, personal training sessions, sports performance sessions. You just get to see these trends and with how people are moving. What I noticed was, again, everyone gets injured at some point. I think it's important to realize that a lot of people here signing up for the webinar, big thing was, how can I avoid injury? How can I prevent injury? We can't really. There's too many variables, right? We need to be smart with our training program and do the best we can to put our body in the, again, most optimal position possible to be successful. And then sometimes, unfortunately, things happen. But what I noticed with some of these classes and these programs were instructors and people really didn't have a good understanding of the pelvis. You hear those normal cues like engage your abs, pull your belly button in, engage your glutes, make sure the knee is aligned with the second toe, back up tall. You hear these very generic cues. One thing people rarely cued was position and control of the pelvis, right? So I would see, fortunately with my background, I would see a lot of the people that would come from these personal training sessions and these group exercise classes. I would see them from an injury standpoint. They'd come to me and be like, hey, Garrett, I don't know what's going on. My hip's been bugging me lately. I don't think I'm weak because I'm doing squats, I'm doing deadlifts, and I think I'm strong, but I don't know what's going on. People weren't paying attention to how that pelvis was oriented, right? What was the alignment like of that pelvis? Are we always dropping as we go into a lunge? And for instance, if you see in this picture right here, we'll pick on this guy, pick on this guy in the white shirt in the front here. Let's just look at his overall position, right? And you can see, looking around the group here, look at their hands. Hands are pretty much right around the top rim of the pelvis. So we can quickly look at the guy in the white shirt and the guy in the back in the pink. One hand is higher, the other hand is lower. So as they go into that lunge position, they're dropping and they're losing position of the pelvis. Does this mean they're automatically going to get injured? No, right? Everything is some of these things are a risk factor. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed to be injured. Some people have a lot of risk factors or never hurt. Other people only have one or two, but consistently have injuries, right? It doesn't always add up like you think. But what we see here is we look at this guy, right? He's on his right leg is forward in the lunge, probably some kind of, maybe we'll say forward lunge, could be doing a split squat, but his left side pelvis is dropping, right? Same thing for the woman in the back. What happens there is this cascade of events where, and now his knees starting to come in, his body's starting to tilt a little bit to that side. We start to see these changes in terms of form. So this was something that I loved. And unfortunately, didn't want people to get injured by any means, but I loved watching tons of people move over the years. And as I started to dig into some of the research, started to understand, okay, wow, there's something there with the pelvis, right? We don't always cue it or talk about it. And I think it's one of those missed areas, but it matters quite a bit when it comes to human movement, but also running. Now, a little research before we get started, because this is what we need to talk about some of this stuff, right? It's not, a lot of this is not my opinion. Some of these things I've seen over the years and then had to really investigate and look into more, because I think it's important that we're not just throwing our opinions out there without some kind of research to back it up. So this research here, is there a pathological gait associated with common soft tissue injuries for runners? What they found was pelvic control was the most important predictable variable when classifying runners as either healthy or injured. So if this is the most important, this is the top thing. This is not what you're hearing about, right, from a lot of other people. We're not talking about how's the pelvis position, are we dropping? We're usually talking about foot strike. We're usually talking about overstriding. We're talking about trunk lean. We're talking about a lot of these other things, but we tend to neglect pelvic control when it could actually be one of the most important things found in this study. It was linked with a lot of injuries, lower extremity, anything from IT band syndrome, patellofemoral syndrome, medial tibial stress syndrome, shin splints, post-tib tendinopathy, Achilles tendinopathy, and also plantar fasciitis in some of those cases. But what's important to realize when we look at this list of injuries, right, we're thinking, okay, the pelvis up here, and we look at these images on the left side of your screen, pelvis all the way up here is actually possibly creating some of these issues or linked with injuries all the way down to the Achilles and the foot, right? So I think what's important to realize, those of you that say you want to prevent injuries, right, or we want to reduce the likelihood of the severity of injuries, which is more so what it should be, or you're trying to recover and rehabilitate from an injury, you need to understand that even though your pain might be in the foot, in the Achilles, or somewhere else, the pelvis and some of these other areas up the chain could be a potential reason for that. And vice versa, right? Could this be a foot issue, which is causing a hip problem? It could be, right? So I think that's one thing to understand about the interconnectedness of the body, right? Especially when you're talking about a sport like running, you're literally bounding from one leg to the next, landing with 2 to 4 times your body weight, and needing to stabilize and absorb force at a very high rate of speed, right? So you can see here from the pictures on the left side, a couple different examples of pelvic drop, right? Woman on the right side, again, very mild. I don't even know if this is something, without measuring this, that we'd classify as significant or something we need to correct. But you can see, again, decent alignment of her leg, good position of her foot, again, tilting a little bit, a little funky through the arms, but nothing bad there. Now we look at the woman on the left side of the screen. Now we can see that degree of pelvic drop, right? That left side pelvis is dropping quite a bit more than the woman on the other side of the screen. And what happens there, we start to see these changes above and below. So look at her arm position. We all have that friend, right, who's running up here in this position. I usually see that arm swing, or the shoulders in more of an abducted position. Could be one side more than the other, could be both sides equally, almost like we're trying to use those arms to create added stability, right? The more we can lift those arms up, the more we tend to improve the stability through the pelvis and the hip. So we tend to see some changes to the arm swing, which is common for a lot of people. Then we see down below, we see position of the knee, right? That knee now has more of a valgus position, or it's collapsing inward. The hip's going to go in more internal rotation. The foot, again, can potentially shift loads into that medial aspect of the foot, stressing plantar fascia, stressing the shin and the tibia. So a lot of different things that can happen here. One good thing from the research that we know, very promising, it's easy to assess, right? We can see it during running analysis. We can see it during specific movement assessments. And it's fairly easy. It takes time to modify or improve in a clinical setting, right? So a lot of the runners that I see with this is something we're looking at on a consistent basis. And I'm almost like just that annoying person there. All right, pelvis level, align, think about these little things. It takes time, going back to patience and consistency, doing these things, simple drills most days of the week, right? Sometimes up to 3 to 6 months to really see a huge impact on, because we've been running in a certain way for so long that we need to break this cycle. We need to break this pattern that's ingrained with us, because this is more than just a weakness. This is a specific movement pattern or compensation that we shifted to over the years. Now, looking at running economy, I know a lot of people want to just overall improve the efficiency as they run. So hopefully potentially have more energy to run faster later in the race or later in the run to see better results. What they found was that the muscles, as your foot is on the ground, the muscle activity accounts for about 40% of your running economy. So if you're getting consistently going into a position where, for instance, with this image on the left side of your screen, you're striking the ground on your left foot, pelvis is dropping. Some of those muscles have to work a lot harder, right? So from an efficiency standpoint, we're losing stability, which means something else has to pick up the slack, right? If we didn't, we would be all over the place as we run, which we typically don't see because we're so good at compensating for things. Other muscles will fire or change the way our body is tilting. We'll lift the arms up in the air. We'll adopt a different foot strike pattern, right? All these small little subtle changes could potentially happen if we're losing stability throughout the pelvis, okay? So it's important to realize that the majority of this muscle support and muscle activity is happening in the beginning of our run. So as our foot is initially striking the ground in that early stance phase of running, this is where, again, we want to be as stable and efficient as possible and holding and maintaining our position, because that's where the majority of forces are coming down on that leg in an area which a time of our running, which typically accounts for the majority of running related injuries. Okay, so it's important from an injury standpoint, running form standpoint, but also running economy as well, because the more these muscles have to work to fire to hopefully keep us in the best position possible when our pelvis is dropping, the more energy we're requiring, we're burning as we run, right? We want to use as little energy as possible so we can run as fast as we possible during those races and lose energy at a minimum. Now, how to assess pelvic drop, right? We're going to look at a couple things here. We're going to look at some very simple tests, right? And you'll be able to clearly see. First one here, and those of you that follow me know this is something I talk about religiously. I look at this in every single person I work with. We test this almost on a quarterly basis. Where are we in terms of hip abductor strength or single leg side plank strength, right? So what we know, the hip abductors, or what's called the glute medius and glute minimus, are these two muscles on the lateral portion of the hip. When you're up into a single leg side plank position, lifting that top leg up, that bottom hip has to really fire to drive that bottom leg into the ground to hold a nice level position. These are the same muscles that are secured right to the outside of the pelvis. So as you strike the ground, those hip abductors have to fire to prevent that opposite side pelvis from collapsing, right? If we're weak there, and those muscles aren't strong enough, we're landing with 2 to 4 times our body weight coming down there at that ground contact, that could pull us into that position where we're losing stability throughout the pelvis. This is typically the most common area that you'll see people address, right? For runners, we always say you need to strengthen your glutes, whether it's a lateral band walk, whether it's a clamshell, whether it's a hip bridge, right? We hear that consistently. In my opinion, we do a fairly good job at this, but we don't take it far enough, right? We want to be able to hold a single leg side plank for 20 seconds per side. That's kind of the minimum majority of runners need to shoot for. That's telling us we have that bare minimum amount of strength to really, again, absorb force, stabilize the pelvis, and to be strong in that frontal plane. Most people that I evaluate during their first initial evaluation, 0 to 5 seconds is common. And it's usually taken us probably 3-4 months to get to this full side plank variation, because we're starting with the modified. We're starting with the bent knee position with the knee on the floor rather than the foot. This is one of the most important things. That there's one thing you take from this. I would try to progress your side planks over time. Traditional side planks, modified side planks from the knee, lifting and lowering the leg, full side plank, lifting, lowering the leg, and then going to a side plank where you're holding that position. Just build up those hip abductors for 20 seconds per side. That's one of the most important things that can and positively impact your running, right? What I think here too as well, one last comment, is we're throwing a lot of band exercises, which are good to a certain degree, doing lateral band walks, doing straight leg band walks, doing monster walks. These are good. I typically find people that are doing those exercises still don't do great in this position. There's a disconnect. Even though, yes, we're strengthening it, we're strengthening with a portion of the body weight rather than using our body weight, right? It's a whole different story of me holding up 185 pounds here in that side plank position than me using a band and going 30 to 50 pounds worth of resistance, right? It's a big difference. So I recommend this side plank path more than anything else. Now, next up, we have the lateral step down. Lateral step down is one of my go-to tests, something I learned over the years from Chris Johnson. He's a physical therapist, works at Runners out of Seattle. This test looks at a lot of different things. It checks a lot of boxes for runners, looking at how balanced, right? How well can you balance on a single leg? Are you stable? What does your position look like in terms of alignment of the pelvis and the leg? Are we dropping or collapsing the knee inward, or maybe rolling into the arch? Do we have ankle mobility? It checks a lot of things, but from a pelvic control standpoint, it's so simple to look at. And I think you would easily and pull out a camera, have your husband, wife, kid, cousin, someone record you doing the lateral step down. You'll be able to clearly see, is this something that I struggle with? I'm going to show you at the end an example of someone that had difficulty with this test and really connect things together. But in order to perform the lateral step down, again, very simple. One leg, again, I'm on a stack of 45-pound plates, but anywhere from 4 to 8 inches high is typically acceptable here. All I'm trying to do is keep all my weight here in that balancing leg. I'm going to slowly, again, use that leg to bend into the ankle, knee, and hip, lower down to the ground. I'm just looking to see what's happening, right? So as I get down, let's go back a second. As I get down to the bottom of that range of motion, how level is the pelvis across? Am I controlling the pelvis and maintaining stability? Is my knee collapsing in? Is my foot collapsing into overpronation? Is my body somewhat vertical, or am I excessively tilting? Or are there other compensations happening that I need to be aware of, right? This is one of the best tests that look at stabilization through a very similar range of motion as running, right? Running doesn't require a lot of range of motion, usually only at the big toe and the ankle, but we need to make sure we're stabilizing the body as best as possible. If not, we're wasting a lot of energy and we're stressing other tissues that we don't necessarily need to stress. So this is the lateral step down test. I know if you work with me, we've done this in the beginning. We probably do it every quarter to some degree. But that is the step down one, just to see from the side view here what it looks like. Slow, controlled, just tapping the heel lightly, not really placing any weight down there. Sorry, this is a demonstration that I use in my coaching app. So when I'm working with someone that's remote, we run through all the same tests. Record yourself doing it. Here's a demonstration of how to complete the test. So that's why you see me talking in it as I perform it. Now, last one, we need to look at people running, right? If your goal is to be a better runner, we better look at running, right? Why neglect the one thing you're trying to get better at? This is a common thing that I see with a lot of people, incorporating strength training programs, rehab programs, but never really getting an insight into how they run, how they stabilize, how are they positioned on a single leg, what's their body looking like. There's so many different things we can understand by running. But a lot of times it's like we look at some of these tests and go through some of these rehab programs without also identifying weak links with the running. So now if we look at running, this young guy here, just look at his pants, right? He has a couple lines on his pants. Look at the difference from the right side, left side, right side. So you can see as he strikes on his left side, what happens, that drop on the right side, consistently dropping into that side. Does that necessarily mean there's going to be a left-sided injury? No, not necessarily. See a lot of people that are unstable on one side, but are actually, in fact, because they're unstable on one side, overloading the other side. So this could cause issues regardless of where the issue is on either side of the body. One thing you tend to see here, and a lot of people get interested in less tightness, when we're striking the ground here and we're losing stability, obviously go back to running economy, stability of the pelvis, those things tend to decline here. When we're dropping like this, some of these other muscles around the lateral hip, could it be the lower back? Could it be some issues around the sacrum, piriformis, IT band, right? IT band is one of the biggest culprits that people are after, right, to fix. We have so many runners with IT band pain. We're always foam rolling the IT band, doing those things. Never really consider how is the pelvis positioned. If I'm dropping the pelvis, what happens automatically here on this left side of the IT band? The distance between the attachment, that TFL muscle at the hip, rim of the hip, all the way down to the tibia, fibula on the lower leg. The IT band is spanning that entire distance. Is a very dense piece of tissue, doesn't actually contract. It's almost like this long fascial connection. So we think, okay, I'm going to stretch my IT band, I'm going to roll my IT band. It's really too strong for that. It's not a muscle, not necessarily like these other muscles and things. But if we drop, I'm on my left leg, I drop my right side pelvis, that whole connection is being pulled taut, right? So people kind of get that irritation either at the lateral hip or the lateral portion of the knee, getting that burning sensation, those IT band symptoms down there. And pelvic drop is something that's really important for that. That could be one of those potential causative factors. But you see here, just as through running, we need to look at these things as we run, right? You might not always see these things in a traditional evaluation, but as you add 2 to 4 times of someone's body weight coming down on that single leg, we start to get a better vision of what's going on here with the body, right? Are we whipping the leg out to the side? You can see that rotation throughout the foot as it goes through there. You can see the drop. We can see the knees being fairly close together, and we have that narrow knee window showing that the hips are in more of an adducted position. It almost tells us what we need to focus on. We need to focus on pelvic control. We need to focus on increasing strength of the hip adductors. And who knows, could there be a foot thing in here as well? You know, foot creates a lot of that stability up the chain as well, right? It's never just one thing, but getting someone on a treadmill to look at the running and slow it down, I mean, tells us a whole lot. Feel free, guys, drop any questions in the Q&A if you have them as we get going here. Don't wait to the end. I'll try to tie them in as best as possible. So now tips and drills to improve pelvic control, right? So we know what it is. We understand it, greater than 5 degrees. We see it, hip abductor strength, single leg side plank, stability control on the lateral step down, and then just overall positioning and form with running. And now how do we improve it? Like I said, we need to look at things, right? 75% of runners get injured each and every year. That's what the stats tell us, right? That's what the research shows us. But we spend more time reacting to problems than actually proactively taking care of things before they become an issue. So I highly recommend those of you out there, get a running analysis done, get a movement assessment done, look at those things and understand what you need to work on. It's great if you're incorporating a strength training program, but is that specific to your needs? Are we strengthening muscles just to strengthen muscles? Which I talked about with some of those group fitness classes early on in the beginning, and some of those people I used to see at the gym, right? Doing a great job strengthening muscles, super strong people. But if we fail to look at stability and alignment of the body, we still can run into a lot of issues despite being very strong, right? And then from there, incorporating a program, rehab program, strength training program, but really focusing on neuromuscular re-education, right? This is what we miss. We strengthen specific muscles and think automatically it's going to improve my stability, right? We can strengthen the hip abductor all day long. That help prevent the pelvis from dropping. But if that pelvis is already dropping and we taught it to do that over years and years of compensation, we need to reteach stability and alignment, right? We can't just assume a stronger muscle is going to stabilize better. Those are two different functions, right? We want to get stronger and we want to improve stability to better align the position of the pelvis. This is what we do in the Healthy Running program. Shameless plug right there for you guys, and hopefully work with the lucky one who will win at the very end of the webinar today. But we look at all these different things regardless of what your goals are. I typically don't care if someone is after a performance goal, injury reduction we're looking for. We always do a running analysis and movement assessment just to make sure that program is geared specifically to your needs. Lane, great question. Hold on, I just commented the wrong way to you. So going to reteach alignment right now. Good transition, I appreciate that. Now, retraining, re-educating, right? Starts pretty simple. And what everyone, again, these are the things that I recommend working on moving forward. Some will be very different from you guys. Others will be the same, but just done with a different emphasis, right? So first thing to think about here, we're trying to just teach how that pelvis to be positioned in space. We can't just do exercise and assume automatically we're going to do them properly. I think that's a big misconception with a lot of things. A lunge is great to teach pelvic control and stability, but if you don't know how to maintain that position as you go through a lunge, it could be worthless for you. You could be strengthening muscles in a bad position, which doesn't translate to better stability. So a couple of my go-tos here that are just basic neuromuscular control drills. Hip hike from deficit is the first one. Standing on something, can be anything, could be a textbook, could be a first step in the staircase, could be a plate like this, small box. Doesn't have to be high, and I recommend that it's fairly low to the ground, because we're not trying to go through a huge range of motion. All we're trying to teach is if our pelvis is off naturally from standing on something that's in a higher surface, one leg up, one leg down. We're just trying to teach what does it feel like to get that pelvis level, if not slightly higher. That's all we're trying to do, because what we want to do with understanding and appreciating that position is we want to put that into play with some harder movements, right? Nothing too hard, because if we start to fall apart, which we tend to do. A lot of people want to do the hardest movements possible because it makes you sweat, might be more enjoyable. From a pelvic control and stabilization standpoint, those are the things that could really limit results. So this is hip hike from deficit here. You can see I'm standing on my right leg. All I'm trying to do is get up into that position right there, right? On my right leg, when I started that movement, my left pelvis was lower. When I finished the movement, my left pelvis was higher. That's it, right? Pretty simple, pretty goofy type exercise, right? But something that just teaches you how to orient that pelvis in space. How are we controlling and appreciating and really connecting with? So it has more of like a mind-body connection here with the hip hike from deficit. Now this next one, hip hike walking, or I like to call it hip hike to single leg stance. Same exact focus. Now I'm just adding a little bit more range of motion. I'm walking from point A to point B. Obviously with running, where we're moving forward. So I like to use hip hike from deficit as a first step, stationary pelvic control, and now moving from point A to point B. You can see from the side, I would probably cue myself a little bit differently, a little more strict on this when there are a couple of things that I think I can improve on this. As I hike the hip up, a little bit of rotation at the body. We want that hip just to move up and down, but the body doesn't change its position. No rotation, no tilting from side to side, as perfectly aligned. But you can just get the point there. Lifting up that opposite side pelvis and then going into single leg stance, teaching myself what that feels like and how to appreciate that position. Pretty simple stuff, surprisingly hard for a lot of people. I find a lot of people will do this for a week or two and say, hey, I'm not sure, am I doing this correctly? It's so foreign to a lot of people, that position, not even understanding the pelvis really moves like that. To now isolate that in a movement pattern feels a little awkward sometimes. Now, these are my favorites. Standing hip abduction, lateral toe taps, right? Can do these ones all day. Don't necessarily need the hardest band possible. In fact, if you want to improve stabilization control for the pelvis with minimal resistance, just because that's running, right? That's that single leg plyometric like activity where you're using your body weight to propel from one leg to the next. But if we look at standing hip abduction, best way to start, because now we're in the frontal plane. Frontal plane is, again, these side to side movements, leg out to the side, leg back in. That's the frontal plane. So you can see here as I get into this position, what I want to do, same as the hip hike from the deficit, right? You see this is a very similar setup. As I'm standing on my left leg, my right pelvis is naturally lower because I'm on an elevated surface. And then as I drive up, now as my hands are on my pelvis, the top rim of my pelvis, I'm on my left leg. The right side pelvis is level with, if not slightly higher. I don't need to be as high as possible. It's just not natural, right? We're trying to prevent the pelvis from dropping 5 degrees, which means we don't necessarily need to be all the way up here, really torquing the pelvis as high as possible. That's not going to carry over well. Very subtle movement, level with, if not slightly higher, because as we start to absorb force, jump, and land, it's going to have a tendency to drop from there. Then all I'm doing from here is trying to maintain good alignment, body position, spine vertical, leg fairly aligned. I'm going to have to need to shift a little bit because I'm on one leg in this position, but I want to try to be as vertical as possible. Same thing on the other side. Only thing that moving leg is doing is challenging the stabilizing leg. This is where a lot of people run into trouble. A lot of people think anytime we attach a band onto the leg, we want to resist it and make it as hard as possible. So I see people using the black bands, these really heavy tension TheraBands, and they're really cranking that leg out to the side and their body is twisting as they do it. This is so simple, right? This is something probably won't make you sweat in any way, not super challenging, but if you have difficulty controlling the pelvis or difficulty balancing, this will really expose those weaknesses here. So light band, good control. If you don't have a band, don't worry about it. Do it body weight without any resistance. As all you're trying to do is set up, find that pelvic neutral position, abduct to challenge your balance, but maintain good stability and control through the leg. Now, lateral toe taps, another one of my favorites. A little bit different. Only difference here is I'm actually bending into the leg. So my ankle, my knee, and my hip are flexed slightly, and I'm trying to maintain good alignment of the leg, good levelness across the pelvis. Only two things I'm really focusing on there. So as that other leg, that non-weight bearing leg goes out to the side, what happens? It stretches the band, which is around this bent knee. So that knee we're trying to, again, give it that little stimulus of we're trying to pull that knee in and put it into the position that, again, we don't want, but we have to use all these muscles around the pelvis, around the lateral hip, around the thigh to stabilize, to prevent yourself from being pulled out of position. So you'll notice if you're not stabilizing here, a couple things will happen. This right side pelvis will drop, or this left knee will collapse in, right? Those are a couple of the things that you'll tend to happen when you're losing form here. So very simple movements, but very form intensive. You need to be in the right position. If you're doing this exercise, pelvis isn't level, knee is collapsing in, you're strengthening muscles in a bad position, right? We need to make sure we're getting out of these compensatory positions, alignment, stability, and then move second. One thing to note here, so I know a lot of people that I've worked with or could be watching, my clients that are watching here right now, I would say take your shoes off as much as possible, especially for these drills here, right? Shoes and feet, right? There's this big disconnect right now. Shoes, again, the stack height, the height between the floor and the ground, and the shoes, all the foam that's in there, difference between neutral, stability, motion, all these differences in shoes. You want to make sure you're connecting the foot with the ground as much as possible. A lot of that sensory input from a stabilization standpoint comes from the bottom of the foot. So getting your feet to connect with the ground, getting out of your shoes, which surprisingly, I see a lot of people that struggle with that, could be one of the best things for you from a stabilization standpoint. Yes, Jessica, shoes and socks off. So if you're like Jessica, shoes off, socks off, get out in the snow, do side planks. But yeah, I would definitely recommend getting shoes off, especially for some of these single leg exercises. All right, guys, so let's move on here. Last two drills I want to show you. First one, marching. Man, I show a lot of marching in place, marching moving forward marching, backward marching, lateral marching, turn that into skipping drills. One of the best, most specific things in a controlled environment that can translate to better running. So and this, I think, this is my buddy Chris Wolf in Nashville. We did these videos together a couple of years ago. Looking at his transition, right, as he strikes the ground and then goes into that next high knee position, his pelvis is locked in that position consistently. It never moves as he marches one leg to the next, right? So we always do these drills in a nice controlled environment. What I find is a lot of people always want to think of, okay, I need to improve my running by thinking about what I need to improve while I'm running. This is the hardest position to improve your running in, right? It's the fastest, there's the most weight, the most force coming down on that leg. It's really hard to do that. That's why we do these things in a controlled environment first. We perfect them over multiple months, and then we start to put it in play with the running. So you'll see here as he starts to come back, going a little bit faster with the marching drill. But at all times, and I wish I had a better video of him moving away from the camera, looking at the pelvis never moves, right? He's mindful of his position, alignment, core control, arm swing, where he's striking the ground, and then keeping that pelvis nice and level. So marching drill is something that you can use to target a lot of different things, whether it's position of the core, foot strike, that transition from one leg to the next to stabilize the pelvis and to align the leg, right? This is a very good drill to put in play here. Let's see the question. Yukio. No, Yukio just commented in the Facebook group a little while ago about the in-place marching. Marching is, depending on what you need, I mean, this is the same exact movement pattern as running, right? Just in a controlled environment. So the better you can control your body in space, stabilize the core, perfect your arm strength, strike the ground underneath the knee, prevent overstriding, and the more those things tend to translate over, right? Because it's one of the basic movement patterns that translate. It's the same exact thing, but it's just a slow motion version of it. So naturally it will help improve your running, but it really depends on your deficiencies, right? This drill right here, I might tell all of you something different to focus on. It depends on your running analysis, depends on your evaluation. Some people who are really, again, big overstriders, I might tell you the only thing I want you to focus on is when you're going from one step to the next, I want you to strike the ground underneath the knee. I don't want you to reach in front for your next step. Those of you that are bad in terms of controlling the pelvis, I'm going to tell you, be very mindful. We're going to do a slow metronome, very mindful as you step from one leg to the next, that your pelvis remains in that level aligned position, right? There's so many different things we can focus on with the marching drill. Now, next up, step up. So once you watch this from the beginning, this is what you guys need to think about if you're incorporating strength training right now, is am I putting myself in the best position to improve pelvic control and stability? Watch what I do here. See that little bit of a hip hike first, and then I maintain that position, right? We want to set ourselves up in the best position possible in the meantime until this stuff fully kind of ingrains in our system. right? Because we're trying to retrain something that's potentially been dropping for years and years now. So we set up with that hip hike, we find level, and then we go through the motion without trying to lose that. Okay, very simple exercise. Most people are, as you'll see in the next slide, really taking this to extremes, loading it up too heavy, going too high. Pelvis in the middle is just kind of, it's going all over the place, right? So this is a lot harder when you start to think about pelvic control as you do some kind of step up or single leg movement like this, where you're moving through the range of motion, a lot harder to maintain that position, right? This is something that took me a while to really train for myself that I felt years ago that I was missing. But as I go down, nice, slow, mindful, thinking about the position, leveling out the pelvis and trying to hold that. A lot of people go up in their step up and just lower back down as that back foot collapses to the ground. Everything goes with it from a stability standpoint. I want to use that and really isolate that top leg. So that leg I'm standing on there is doing all the work. It's driving me up, slowly lowering it back down to the body. That back foot's not doing anything till it touches the ground, right? I'm not reaching, I'm not dropping, I'm not collapsing into the knee, all right? Really simple stuff, but that goes a long way. So I definitely recommend thinking about this before you start to add some resistance. Now, a lot of people, again, we had a lot of people there in the poll in the beginning want to understand how to use, improve their understanding of pelvic control to implement that in a strength training program or use some kind of strength training program to impact their running. Couple areas people usually really self-sabotage their results, right? If you're already doing a strength training, if you're strength training consistently, this is something that fits, it just fits seamlessly within there. You might not even need to change your exercises. You just need to understand that whole concept of pelvic control to re-educate your system on what proper is, right? So we look at the step up we just talked about a second ago. Look at this, look at that step, right? What's happening immediately? My leg is up so high on that step. Well, I'm not sure how high that is, 30 inches, 24 inches, I'm not even sure. But immediately I'm in a position where I'm standing on my right leg on the step. My left side pelvis is in a whole different world, right? It's like 10 degrees dropped. So this is what I see from a lot of people is we like to make things harder just to make things harder. We need to make things harder by respecting position and alignment, which again, hopefully the knowledge that I'm sharing with you today will help kind of change your focus with that. Because from a pelvic control standpoint, and this is good to improve strength. Are you hiking? Are you doing some other things where you need to drive up through a big range of motion? You can really improve strength there. You can improve balance. But when it comes to the stability of the pelvis, that pelvis for me is only level when I'm at the top, right? Throughout the entire motion, it's just going along for the ride and kind of going in every which direction, right? So this is where a lot of people go wrong in terms of step up specifically, trying to make it harder by going higher rather than mastering the position and loading it up with weight at an appropriate range of motion. Next one here, we have our lunges, right? A lot of people that work with me, you'll notice we don't do a lot early on traditional lunges. We usually stick with step ups. We stick with marching, split squats when 2 feet are on the ground. We stay away from some of the dynamic lunging early on, just because as you step back, now you have to control that pelvis on every step. This one right here, the point of this one is doing things that are just too heavy, right? Look at my body position as I go through here. As I step back, hold on a second. As I step back, I'm just stepping back, driving that foot in the ground, and the pelvis is just twisting as I go through. So I'm losing stability through the pelvis. One of the most traditional exercises you'll see in the majority of strength training programs. You go to a gym, the classes, I mean, the lunge is in every single movement. Yoga, right? Different warrior positions, lunge positions to hold statically. But are we really thinking about position of the pelvis as we're in that? Right? We're usually just moving through the range of motion, trying to balance as best we can, rather than really isolating a good pelvis. And then next thing is just not focusing on it, right? Lacking emphasis on maintaining a level pelvis position, rather than making that a focus within your program. Now, a couple of real life scenarios. I want to put a couple of videos in here just to show you firsthand. A lot of this has been me so far demonstrating. Gets a little boring. You guys are probably sick of me at this point. So let's look at a couple of different people. So running analysis is going to look at, again, just pelvis from side to side, right? What's happening? We can see here, again, slower cadence. No, it's slow motion, slower cadence, striking the ground, dropping into that position there a little bit. If I just drew a line through that, right? Only matters if it's above 5 degrees. Anything before that, can I still want to address within the program, but not necessarily going to say, hey, this is an issue. These are the things that you'll tend to see. Those of you that stay here, I have all my injuries are on one side of the body, right? Or this side is tight. My glute, my piriformis, my hamstring is always tight on this side of the body. It's never my other side, because you might have one side that's just dropping consistently, right? Or is it both sides? We can look here just through the position of the knees, right? Looking at the knee window, very close together, right? So we have that adducted position at the legs and the hips, which we know is a risk factor for injury. So need to work on pelvic control, need to work on increasing hip abductor strength, glute medius specifically, to improve the position of the pelvis in the leg as he runs. Now with the lateral step down, again, surprisingly a challenging test. I have to demonstrate it every single day. So another video of me looked halfway decent, but look at the position here. Look at the difficulty. This is common. This is what I see for, again, 50% of people having to really think. But then we look at what's happening at the bottom of the position. We just drew a line through, level the pelvis. We can see that drop, right? And then we compare that to the other side. But maybe a little bit more significant there. But what tends to happen as you go down, that knee wants to come in, the foot wants to roll into the arch. This is one of those things that could potentially create more stress through a lot of different areas. Okay, so that's the lateral step down. All right, guys, so I'm going to throw one more quick quiz at you. See how well you've been paying attention here at the very end. Last quiz, and then we'll get into entering names into the actual raffle itself and try to wrap up here really soon. So number one, pelvic drop requires your attention is a predictor of injury when the opposite side drops more than how many degrees? Said it a few times, 3 degrees, 5 degrees, 7 degrees, or 10 degrees. Just making sure you understand what that. I don't care if you remember the number specifically, but no, it's not always a problem. It can be okay in a certain range. It's something we want to improve and fix when it's beyond that. Number two, the hip abductors, and more specifically, I just said it a second ago again, what muscle are partly responsible for controlling the pelvis? Hip flexor, glute medius, hamstring, IT band. It's going to trip a few people up. 3, in order to improve pelvic control, you must strengthen the hip abductors, re-educate, prioritize alignment over heavy resistance, or all of the above. So we're going to wait a second here. Get a few of you to add your responses in, those of you that can see the poll today, and then I'm going to get into the raffle here in a second if you're interested in entering your name. I know I tripped a couple people up. I can already see where I did it when I threw out a couple extra things there that are also questions or answers. So we're going to wait till 1 or 2 more people respond. I want to get above 80%, which we're just about there right now. 1 more person that's thinking. Perfect. All right, guys, let's take a look at this real quickly. Let's start to wrap up here. So pelvic drop requires your attention. It is a predictor of injury when the opposite side drops more than 5 degrees, right? 93% of you got that right. Hip abductors, glute medius. So tripped up a few people that are talking about hip flexor. We wrote hip flexor, the glute medius and minimus, hip abductors on the outside of the hip. That's what we're looking for. In order to improve pelvic control, you must, again, I said re-educate quite a few times. It was a mix of all 3 of these, all the above: strengthen, re-educate, prioritize alignment over resistance. Okay, let's start to wrap up here. Okay, so hopefully at this point, I showed you exactly how you can improve your running by focusing on pelvic control, pelvic stabilization, alignment, and control of that lower extremity. If you're someone who's interested in entering the raffle for 1 free month of the Healthy Running Program, again, awesome program, a little biased, but I think, again, looking at your running form, completing a movement assessment, understanding your needs, your injury history, your goals moving forward, and then helping you create that specific program to move you, can improve, again, your alignment. What are you focusing on? How do we get there in the fastest, safest, and most effective way possible? If you're someone who's interested in entering the raffle for 1 free month, all you need to do right now is, last poll, I promise, yes or no. Do you want to enter the raffle 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program? If you're a current client, click yes, just because I will can give you your next month free. I'll kind of wipe that clean if you are the lucky winner. want to make sure I'm hooking you up too. So again, running analysis, movement assessment, 1 free month. Let's wait till we get a couple more people here. We're just about 80% of people have responded. The rest might be in bed by now, cooking dinner or something. All right, we're gonna wrap up here. Get your questions, start adding your questions in there if you can for the Q&A. So for those of you, again, if by chance you're not the lucky winner of the raffle, but still need help with your running in any way, again, happy to help you. What I want to do here is share a link to schedule what's called a customization call. So whether you have questions specifically or you're interested in the program, healthy running program, I only have 3 spots available in the healthy running program right now, just due to space and time. Need to make sure, again, doing the best job for the current people that I have. So only have 3 spots available. If you're interested in talking more, whether you have questions about the content, want to talk about running form, an injury you're dealing with, strength training, and help really piece these things together, or you're interested in the program, I'm going to send a link here. Also texting that link a couple minutes ago. I scheduled that to come out at about 7:50 Eastern. So there's a link right there. Take a second, schedule that customization call. We'll talk about all the content, see what questions you have, and hopefully fine tune this as best as possible for you. I find a lot of people walk away from the webinars understanding the concepts, but not knowing how to apply it to their situation. So that's what I want to do here is help you fine tune that as best as possible. So I want to thank you guys for attending the webinar this evening. Tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time, I will be sending the webinar replay. I will be sending the name of the raffle winner. Make sure you check that if you're the lucky winner. Don't miss out. Also, there will be a link in there. Again, sent you the link here in the chat, sent it by text, and then tomorrow morning, I'll throw in the email as well, just in case you didn't yet. But only 3 spots available to the healthy running program. So make sure you jump on that soon because those will go quickly. Or if you have specific questions, I can answer for you because I want to really make sure you take action moving forward and then not just watching a webinar to watch a webinar. You're watching this and you're becoming better in some way. Look in your spam folder. If you don't see that by 11:05, 11:10, look in your spam folder. It might end up in there. But I just want to say thank you guys for joining me this evening. So now for those of you that want to hang out for a few minutes, going to hang out for about 5-6 minutes or so, answer a few questions. I already have them coming in. Sorry, Terry, I'll enter you into the poll anyways, Terry. Sorry about those of you that didn't enter because the poll didn't show up, which happens sometimes. Shoot me a message. I texted you a couple times about the webinar. Just text me back or email me and say, hey, enter my name. But Terry, I have you covered. Okay, so a couple questions. Andrew asked, what parts of the body does pelvic instability limit when running? Could be anything really. If we think of position of the pelvis, hip, we're getting that pelvis is dropping, the knee tends to want to collapse in, the foot can collapse, and all things that could possibly happen. Does it mean they're all going to? No. It really depends on you and your specific situation. But the foot, the hip, and the pelvis really work hard together to create that alignment and that stability. So I usually find we don't really work on one in isolation. We're going to look at all of these pieces and see which one needs the most TLC. So what effects does your pelvic have on your lift and landing when running? It's a good question. So when you're striking the floor, striking the ground, and I mentioned this a couple times, 2 to 4 times your body weight coming down on that leg. If we're always dropping, there's a lot of force coming into an unstable position, right? Running is literally this single leg bound or this plyometric jump from one leg to the next. So that amount of force coming into an unstable environment, that's what's causing us to use a lot of these other muscles to have to compensate to stabilize, or we're really overstressing specific tissues. If we can improve the alignment and the control of the pelvis, we're moving as efficiently as possible. That's when that body moves in a nice, smooth, horizontal motion, right? Things work well in that environment, but it's something a lot of times we have to train to get. So now a couple other questions here. Anna asked, how to assist with IT band stress and become a better runner. The IT band is one of the most common areas you'll hear about for running related injuries. Usually not the IT band's fault. We spend too much time foam rolling the IT band, trying to stretch the IT band, when in fact it's such a strong, dense piece of tissue. It's really not going to lengthen a whole lot from those things. So we need to focus on what areas aren't stabilizing. Could be looking at range of motion down the chain, the great toe and the ankle, stabilization of the foot and the arch, stabilization of the hip and the pelvis. Those things tend to create a good environment, and then always thinking about cadence when it comes to IT band issues. If we increase cadence by 5% or your number of steps per minute, you can reduce the amount of stress at the knee by 23%. So you can really take stress off that area as you work on some of these key things to resolve the underlying issue. Jen, great question. No. So what I've seen, I might have to dig through more research to give you something definitive. About, again, 5 to 6 studies that I used when I was creating this webinar showed that women were typically more susceptible here to pelvic drop than men. Why, I didn't say specifically, but that's all I can say to that. I don't know 100%. I would need to dig into it a little bit more, but I see it in both. I don't think I've necessarily noticed myself, hey, this woman's running here. As I look at her, this is something we need to look at because she's more susceptible. I see it fairly common on both populations, so it's hard to say exactly. So Diane, great question. What amount of reps are we looking for these exercises? Something like this, reps don't matter, right? We want to do them consistently as often as possible. A couple times a day, every other day. We want proficiency with doing the movement rather than more is going to be better. As soon as you can control and appreciate your position from doing the hip hike from deficit, the hip hike walking and those drills, immediately go to the next step, right? Okay, now I'm going to put that into play with the standing hip abduction and the step ups and those other movements. When we're looking at the neuromuscular system, we don't really, again, we want more repetitions frequently throughout the week. We want to do stuff often. It's not like we're trying to build up strength in the quad. I want you to do 3 sets of 10 of that leg extension. That's what's going to get you there. So I would say from just a very basic standpoint, if you did 2 to 3 sets of 10 to 20 repetitions, you'd be fine. But I would try to do this more often throughout the week. Do it in the morning, do it in the evening. Do it in small pieces and just get yourself to get in the process of, I know what that feels like. I know how to do that. It's becoming easier for me. So hopefully I answered that, but didn't answer that. Now, Mary Lynn asks, how does pelvic control improve economy and pace? So we talked a little while ago about running economy. Again, if we're consistently breaking down and dropping through the pelvis, all of these muscles are working harder, which means they require more energy, which reduces running economy, right? We want to improve running economy by being in the most stable position possible to just efficiently go from one leg to the next. So in turn, and when it comes to pace, you'll probably be able to less express kind of that strength and that power. Because if we have part of the body that's not in a good position, how do we forcefully push off, right, from the glute, from the calf to propel the body forward? So it really starts to hamper, again, running economy and pace, and potentially cause you to fatigue a little bit quicker within your runs because we're requiring more energy to run. Jim asked, relief from left leg tightness. So this is one of those things 100%. Those of you that struggle with tightness on one side of the body, I would 100% look at stability over flexibility and mobility. I see a lot of people that are trying to stretch everything and foam roll everything, which is, I understand that 100%. You feel that, and that's a symptom that you're feeling, but it's a very subjective symptom. Just because something is tight feels tight doesn't necessarily mean it's actually shortened. So we need to understand, is that muscle actually shortened, or is there something else going on, a loss of stability, weakness, or imbalance that's causing me to consistently overload that tissue? This is something right here that I see contributes to a lot of tightness, specifically at the hip, Achilles, feeling it at the IT band, or even in the foot. So realizing that tightness doesn't always mean one specific tight muscle. And then Ann says, again, just wanting to strengthen hip and ankle. This is something that obviously, if we're looking at hip strength, ankle strength, will put us in a good position, a good aligned, secured position where we can use the hip and the ankle to the best of our ability, right? A lot of times we're losing stability. Where you're going to really be able to strengthen the hip in an unstable position, the ankle in an unstable position. If our knees collapsing in and our foot's collapsing in, things become a lot harder because we're strengthening into compensations. So really focusing on being in the best position possible from a stability and alignment standpoint. All right, guys, so that's going to be it here. Let's wrap up officially for the night. Make sure I didn't miss any questions. Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Jackie, Terry, Sharon. I appreciate you guys for joining this evening. Any questions, again, feel free, shoot me a message, let me know, schedule that customization call. Let's talk about you and figure out what you need moving forward. But hopefully you're the winner of that raffle, and get to talk to you soon and work with you a little bit more closely. So thanks everyone. Have a great Thursday evening, and I appreciate you guys for joining me.